time. As you can see, we have the engine fully assembled and we're ready to make these two together. We are going to be doing some fab work on the exhaust to get our turbo set up where we need it. So obviously we need to put these two together and lay out all of our wiring and everything so that when we start doing the hot side of the turbo, we can account for clearances for wiring harnesses and all the various hurdles you'll run into along the way. What we're going to do today basically is we're going to take the engine and we're going to mate it to the transmission. I can't stress safety enough, guys. When you're working with a heavy brick like this that tends to roll and tilt and flop around, I always anchor these things to the surface I'm working on. For one, it makes it easier to put the two together because this is nice and stable. And for two, when you're trying to put this together with the transmission, you don't shove the transmission off the table and have it in the floor and crack a case for you. So that, just really pay attention to your safety. When you're doing stuff like this, it's real easy to get hurt when you're working with heavy objects and hoists and moving things around. I would hate to see anybody suffer any kind of an injury from doing work like this. So I can't not stress safety enough. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the engine off the stand. Sorry, it was a little messy. We were kind of in a hurry to get everything together here for you guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to spin this bad boy around right here, get it aimed the right way. Then we're going to take it off of the hoist. And we're going to start putting the two of them back together. So as soon as we have this thing hanging on the engine hoist and ready to go back together, we'll be right back.
Slow life music.
Welcome back. Like I said, we were going to come back as soon as we got this thing hanging on the hoist and ready to go together. Before we get started on that, one of the things that I wanted to point out, there's a lot of guys like me, they do this stuff all the time. So they go real quick, they don't think about the little things that the normal everyday average car guy would want to do at home in his garage. Manufacturers, they install things on these to make them a lot easier to bring these two together and line them up perfectly. I don't know how well you can see them. Basically on the back side of the engine we have what are called dowel pins or locating pins. Hondas and Acuras, they use two different size ones. I don't know why, I guess it's their way of foolproofing or whatnot. But you'll have one on either side of the engine. They're going to line up with specific holes in the front of the transmission. And it just makes everything kind of go together once, and it gives you a visual reference too. While you're assembling and you're putting the two together, if you can see that those two pins are going to be close to lining up, it'll let everything slide together just like it should. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and start putting these two together. The way I normally do this, in this particular fashion, this is a lot easier to move because it's on four wheels. And you can maneuver it a lot easier and kind of bring it in and bring the two together. So basically I've got the engine raised enough where I should clear the table without any issues. We're just going to step around here, just going to kind of give it a little shove and bring it closer together. Looks like I'm going to be a little bit too high, but that's not an issue at all. We'll just walk right over here, and we're going to let this thing down just a shade. That has us really close together. Now, occasionally, there is a little bit of manhandling involved. That's another reason that I suggest tying this to what you're working with. Alright, took a little manhandling, a little wiggling, a little maneuvering and tugging and whatnot here and there, but we have the two of them together. most all of your imports in a front wheel drive configuration use a rather large bolt. So it's a whole lot easier when you can wiggle everything and kind of manhandle it, because these are very fine threaded and they're not forgiving in the bolt holes. So if you cross thread one into this aluminum, you're just cross threaded. There's not much you can do about it. Once you get everything in place and lined up, it's just a matter of let's start a few bolts. That way we can kind of bring everything together. And a lot of times these are a couple of different lengths. So you might have to, especially if it's been a while since you've dismantled the car, you might have to play around with different spots for bolts and stuff like that. Usually on these imports, if you're close to the right bolt hole, you'll have about that much of the shank of the bolt visible above the surface you're bolting together. So that's kind of a quick reference as to if you've even remotely got the right bolt going in the right spot. This particular Acura utilizes 6 of those bolts. Basically, we're going to have 2 on one side of the engine, 2 on the very top, and then 2 on the other side of the engine, which would be, in this case, this would be the back side. We just have it kind of transverse from where it should be. And now we have all of them started. Once you get all of this together, there's 2 more bolts that go in the bottom of the oil pan that kind of help support the 2 of them and bring everything together in a tight manner. Normally suggest doing is tighten the 2 on one side first and then come to the other side and tighten those. And that saves the last 2 on the top for the very end. Sometimes, excuse me for just a second, you have to grab an adapter. I like to use extensions to reach bolts. I will when I have to. If I can use a wobble drive, I'll use that first. When you use an extension of any kind, you lose energy. One of those that I explained about, if the threads get a little bit boogered up, they're just a little bit boogered up. The nice thing is that being it's aluminum with a steel bolt, you can go ahead and run it in as long as it doesn't feel like it's in an extreme bind. Obviously if it feels like it's in an extreme bind, then you're going to have to, you're going to want to stop and pull it back out and see what's going on. Usually, with the little electric impact like that, they don't have a whole lot of power, so they're going to start rattling a bolt almost immediately. So just pay real close attention when you are putting everything together like that. And if your bolt feels a little bit too tight, figure out what's going on. All right, so that has the 2 of them put together. And we're going to set it down on the table completely. All right. So we have them both together. They're on the table. The whole table moves. Gets a little heavy obviously when you have the engine and transmission on it, but this way puts it just almost perfectly the right height for the fab work that we're going to be doing. At worst I may have to sit on a stool or something like that when it comes to actually building the manifolds to lead over to the turbo. Alright guys, you can see we have everything together here. We have it kind of turned around so it actually same orientation it would be in the car. Our next step before we get very much further carried away is we're going to take, you can see we have the engine harness laid out here somewhat. The nice thing that I absolutely love about the late model cars is your powertrain harness usually only has a few connections that connect it to the car itself, and you just put that over the engine and pull everything out all at one time. When I first started doing this a long time ago, you had to unhook every single wire, and sometimes that gets very tedious and very time consuming. So basically we have it pretty much laid out like it's going to be in the car. Just kind of ran in general to where it's going to be. But the nice thing about it is when you're doing this, it's all pretty much plug and play. You just kind of, it's almost foolproof, I guess would be the best way to put it. you just kind of go along, you plug your, once you get it laid in the somewhat correct orientation, it actually goes together quite easily. There's a few things that I have to do along the way to get it to set where it actually is going to be once we're all said and done. But I mean, I can give you guys, just a quick rundown and idea of how everything goes together. You basically have all of your injection and your alternator and AC wiring here. This goes over and plugs into the ECU for the car. We have a couple of plugs that run down the back here for the VTEC and the oil pressure switch. Obviously our coil connectors for the front coils, we have those for the back coils here. Once you get over here, this is pretty much all transmission with like 2 plugs that go to the car itself. So long story short, what we're trying to show you guys here is not to be afraid. Don't be intimidated by something like this. I'm not saying anybody can do it, but if you're mechanically inclined and you can remember how things go, and if you can follow directives, there's stuff like this all over everywhere. Okay, now this is stock configuration at the moment, yes. We're going to be adding a lot of stuff to it that takes a lot of thought process and a lot of skill and a lot of proper planning. That's why we're explaining to you now that when we're doing this, we have to do this in certain steps. Obviously, getting the motor and transmission put together and getting the wiring laid out, like I was explaining earlier, is very crucial for once we start running exhaust pipe to our turbo setup, because we don't want any of this next to a hot exhaust pipe. If it's at all possible, we want to keep it as tucked out of the way and out of harm's way as possible. Can you imagine the headache it would cause if a hot exhaust pipe melted through the casing here and got into the wiring? Not only would the car probably run horrible, but it could also very potentially damage a very expensive ECU. So when you are thinking of a task like this that you really want to tackle, don't be afraid, don't let it intimidate you. It's really not as hard as it looks.